When I pulled into the Baxter's parking lot, the first thing I noticed was how dilapidated everything around it looked. I knew the place well, as I had grown up just a few blocks away, but I hadn't been back to the old neighborhood in 40 years, and a lot had changed here in that long time. Sometime around the end of World War II, the building I was now heading towards had gone from being a home for a family with kids and probably a dog to a cozy neighborhood bar. Back then, it was a nice little place where neighbors would stop in for a beer after a day's work, and wives would meet their husbands for a nice evening together. Now those good old days are long gone. Today, Baxter's was in the poorest neighborhood of Cleveland's most depressed suburb. There were more boarded-up buildings around him than residential, and most of them were covered with ugly graffiti from neighborhood gangs. Abandoned cars, some of them coffins with people in them, littered the streets and alleys around the neighborhood. It was a part of town that the city fathers had long forgotten. I just put my cap on my forehead and went inside. The atmosphere of the old smoky bar hit all my senses at once. First to attack was the smell. The disgustingly pungent odor of beer and urine, not the most attractive way to introduce the place to the customers. The second blow was to my eyes. The whole room was very dark except for one corner, which was illuminated by a bright beam of a mini spotlight directed from somewhere above. In the circle of light, a naked but very unattractive woman was slowly wriggling, doing some sort of dance on a table next to the bar. With her head down, she swayed back and forth to the beat of the music blasting from an old jukebox next to the table. One of ZZ Top 1's old hits blaring from the speakers made my skin vibrate with every bass note Dusty picked up. I knew that this volume would definitely make me deaf if I stayed here for too long, but I planned to do only what I had to do and leave as soon as possible. Once my eyes got used to the contrast between the lighting and the lack of it, I walked over to the bar, found a stool whose seat wasn't torn or sticky, and settled down on it. The bartender at the other end, from testing the strength of the old polished wood in front of him, finished. She turned, tossed the rag into the sink, and washed her hands under the spray from the faucet. I just sat there waiting in my seat for her to pay attention to me. I hadn't seen her in 40 years, she had changed horribly over that long, but I would still recognize her anywhere. Discreetly, over the years, I'd followed her in the events in her life. And a couple times, I'd seen her up close, even though she hadn't even noticed me. I didn't know if she could recognize me after all. But I hope not. At this moment, she was standing with her back to me. Her jeans tucked into cowboy boots were tighter around her hips than I remembered, and the ugly layer of fat on her belly jutted outward and hung over the tight belt around her waist. She was wearing a white faded t-shirt with the letters Back Sisters faded on the back. The silver-gray curls that made up her hair fell to the middle of her back, gathered in a disheveled ponytail. It looked like she hadn't used a brush or comb in a long time. From my bar stool, I could see the collection of tattoos on her arms and neck, and knew that there were others hidden from view in various places. From the side, her face looked tired and sullen, her nose crooked sideways, the jagged scar that stretched over one eye telling of her past hard life. She wore no makeup, as if that would do anything for her appearance, and there seemed to be a perpetual wry grin on her lips. All in all, this bartender looked like the kind of burly McGare I wouldn't want to meet one-on-one in a dark alley. Her name was Sue, and wiping her hands, she took a swig of alcohol from the glass by the sink, shaking her hair to give it some semblance of order. She turned and looked around her domain. It was then that she noticed a new customer, me. As she approached, the deafening music from the machine finally stopped, and the dancer climbed down from the table. "I'll be back in an hour," the worn stripper said, not even trying to cover her sagging breasts as she walked past us. "Okay," came a terse response from the other side of the bar. The barmaid stopped in front of me and asked, "What can I get you?" "Bud Light," I said, placing a $5 bill on the counter. She walked over to the refrigerator and pulled my click in, setting the bottle in front of me. She took the money and paused to give me another careful look before returning to the sink to wash the dirty glasses that had accumulated. I couldn't tell if she recognized me. Probably not. After all, it had been a long time, and as much as she had changed, I had changed just as much myself. Hell, back then, my head was a mound of wavy blonde hair, but now my skull is more smooth skin than hair, which is why I always wear a baseball cap. The man on the other end of the bar finally got his way, and his head hit the wood, sending his dazed body crashing to the stained floor. "Shit!" came an irritated exclamation from the sink. "Elroy, why do you always do this to me?" She stood wiping her hands again, looking around the room in disgust. "Can someone help me get this drunk into his car?" "How about you?" she asked, waving a rag in my direction. "Okay," I replied flatly, setting my beer on the counter. The two of us had to lift, pull, drag, and then push, bend, and shove this extremely drunk guy from the floor where he collapsed on the floor to a more or less sitting position behind the wheel of his car. As we were on our way back to the bar, the boozier's car behind us suddenly came to life, howled and sped down the street. We didn't hear the expected crash though, so we just shrugged and continued on our way back. "Thank you," the bartender said, placing another beer in front of me. "That clown puts on the same show about once a week. One day, he'll stop coming here when he crashes into something and splits his drunk ass open." For the second time since I walked in, she looked me over intently from head to toe. I couldn't read her mind, but I was curious if she recognized me. "What's the matter?" I asked. "It's nothing." She stretched out. "You just look familiar. That's all. Are you from around here?" "I'm from Texas. I'm just passing through, and I thought I'd stop by." She slid me the same incredulous look, then went back to the sink, picked up the glass she'd left behind and took another sip. Now that I could see better in the dark, I looked around the room again and saw that I was the only customer left in the bar. As I looked around, I heard the set-down glass clink with a clatter, and she muttered shit. Her head turned sharply in my direction, and she stared at me with a mixed expression of amazement and hatred. "Ray, you son of a bitch!" she hissed unbelievably, walking over and standing in front of me with her fist on her thick thighs. Bust my eyes. "But how is that possible? You're dead. I shot you 40 years ago." "Oops." There's a black cat suddenly out of the bag. "Well, actually, Suin, you didn't kill me, or I wouldn't be here right now." I took a little sip from my bottle and set it on the bar. "Yeah, everyone thought you did it, but you didn't. That's why you've been locked up in Marysville for the last 38 years, for doing something you only thought you'd done. I hope you had a pleasant time there." I smiled with the edge of my lips. "Fuck you, you son of a bitch," she snarled, glaring at me. "You're repeating yourself. You've called me a son of a bitch before. Why don't you try using some of the colorful language you've learned from the other murderers and horrors you shared cells with? Come on, darling. Let me see the real you, that hard and straight as a steel nail, the little bitch you've turned into. Show me the smashing little slut from cell block C." In the tense silence, I nonchalantly took another sip of my Bud Light and, turning the bottle slightly in my hand, pointed the neck of the bottle toward a dazed Sue Ann. "What you got there? I think I see a property of Big Wanda tattoo on your neck. Come on, she probably taught you a lot more than son of a bitch. I know about all those nights you slept with your head between her fat thighs. You must have enjoyed every minute of it. I also know all about the times she sold you to other gangs for cigarettes." "Well, hell, yeah, I can see their tattoos all down the length of your arms. They used to pass you from cell to cell for all comers to fuck you while you sucked and licked all those Mexican and black bitches. That must have been a funny sight, Sue Ann." Shock, pain and hatred blazed in her glazed pupils, drilling me. "I even know about the baby you had with that big black security guard. What was his name again? Malcolm, was it? Anyway, it doesn't matter that black baby you had to give to the state family service, so as you can see, I know everything about you from the day you shot me in the head." She stood there, on the other side of the bar, staring at me wide-eyed, frozen in place like a marble statue. I smiled slightly at her, put my elbows on the bar, and rested my chin on my interlocked fingers, watching her reaction. We stared into each other's eyes for a long time, standing and sitting across from each other, neither of us moving or looking away. She was the first to blink as she turned and took a few tentative steps to pour herself another drink. A large one this time. I seized the opportunity and leisurely took a swig of my bottle as well. Sue-In stood at the sink with both hands on the countertop at her side, turning her head slightly to look at my reflection in the mirror in front of her. She didn't say a word, but I could almost hear the thoughts rustling around in her brain. She took another big sip from her glass. Exhaled and turned to me. "So why the hell are you here?" I smiled and took another sip as well. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. Maybe we could reminisce about old times, you know, reminisce about the past." Her face changed as she lowered her gaze to the floor. Her stern expression softened. Her shoulders slumped. And her whole body shrank. Her rat tail slipping down to cover one breast. When she lifted her head again, I could have sworn she looked sad and exhausted. I didn't believe it for a second. In front of me was still the woman who cheated on me with the asshole lawyer, the same woman who traded me in like some old, unwanted car for a new richer, more respectable husband, the same woman who shot me in cold blood in the head and set my trailer on fire, burning my body beyond recognition. Finally, this was the woman who blew her new husband's brains all over the living room carpet when she got sick of him. No. I wouldn't buy a single word that flew out of her faded lips. She spoke softly and tiredly when she asked, "What do you want from me, Ray?" "I've done my time, and I've paid my debt in full. For the rest of my life, I'll remain suspended on parole, so you got nothing to worry about." "Our son? I haven't seen Robbie in 40 goddamn years. I don't even know where he is now. Your mother and father made very clear to me that they wanted nothing to do with me, and Robbie will never know what I did. Hell, he's probably forgotten I exist. I'll never see him again, so either tell me what you want or get the hell out of here." Another long sip from the bottle and another smile from me. "I just wanted you to know that your sneaky cheating, the fact that you kicked me out and finally put a bullet in my head, was the best thing that ever happened to me. Amazing. Right? Seriously, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. You're gonna ask why. It's pretty simple. If you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't be rich, having more money now than I'll ever be able to spend. I wouldn't have a beautiful loving wife who worships the ground I walk on, and I love her more than anything in the world too. If it weren't for you, she and I wouldn't have 5 children of our own, and we wouldn't have 12 more adopted children to raise, and I wouldn't have 19 grandchildren now." Swan's pale skin began to blot red, and a thin vein on her temple swelled and began to throb as I spoke softly to her about myself and my life, which she missed. I wouldn't be a member of Qantas or the Chamber of Commerce or the country club or the city council. I would not have built from scratch and sold 2 companies whose combined income will provide my children and my children's children a trouble-free and comfortable life. I would not have traveled the world and seen the 7 famous wonders of the world. Without what you did, I wouldn't have made love to my wife on top of a mountain in Peru, under the most incredibly starry sky we've ever seen. I wouldn't have done any of it. Thanks to you, I have everything a man could ever dream of. That's why I just wanted to stop by and thank you for everything." I watched as she stood there, head slightly lowered and eyes closed, apparently pondering wistfully about what she had and what she could have had. She served 38 interminable years for crimes she didn't commit. I had 40 years of a wonderful, love-filled life. She cowered at the bottom amidst the most unbelievable filth and did the most disgusting, perverted things just to survive. I, on the other hand, thrived and grew under sunlight and clear skies. She was a little over 60 now, killing her days in a rundown smelly bar and living in a room upstairs. I lived in a beautiful mansion and went to the country club. Life was so unfair. When I thought about it, I laughed involuntarily. "Thanks for rubbing my nose in at Ray," she said in an almost lifeless voice, I used to spend every minute of every day regretting my decisions, and I had a long, long time to think about it. Now I'm too old and worn out to do anything else, but live my shitty life day in and day out. Maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll die quietly in my bed. But I don't think so, because everything in my life was going downhill, one thing after another. I've fallen into a cesspool, and I'll probably die in it. There's nothing you can tell me that's gonna make it worse. Hell is hell, Ray, so, thanks for stopping by. And I get the fuck out of here. She turned to face the sink again and knocked back the rest of what was in her glass. Well, thanks for the beer too, I said, setting the empty bottle on the counter. You can keep the change. I turned and headed for the door. I have a question before you go. Her husky voice came from behind me. Why did you stay alive? Who was I shooting at? I stopped in the semi-darkness and turned to look at her one last time. I didn't have a smile this time, but I answered anyway. This was my friend, Mac. He was someone I sometimes let stay overnight in my trailer. Mac was sick with lung pneumonia and had passed away the morning you came in and did what you had planned to do to me. Apparently, you figured that since Mac was sleeping in my bed and about my height and weight, it was me. As I found out later, he was already dead by the time you splattered his brains all over the pillow. I got back just as you jumped in your car and drove off. I hid in the bushes when the firemen and police arrived, and they thought I was in the trailer that burned to the ground. That night, the Ray you knew disappeared, and I became Mac. Ray was dead. Mac had a full life ahead of him. But I had one last thing left to do as Ray. The night you shot your lawyer husband, I was there. You'd never know it, but I was there. I waited until you were passed out from the evening's drinking, and when Mr. Asshole came home, I put a bullet in his forehead, just like you shot Mac in cold blood thinking it was me. Afterward, I put the gun in your hand and took the contents of his secret safe. You took responsibility for his murder and mine. The money I took from the asshole lawyer gave me the startup capital I needed as I began a new life under a different name. Your life went to hell and I went to Texas. So, Sue Ann, everything I did because of the way you treated me, because I loved you and you pissed on my love and tried to take my life. You know what the Bible says? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You pissed me the hell off, and I made sure your life was a living hell. Now do I answer your question, you stupid selfish bitch? The deed was done, and the rat-gnawed back cover of the old book was slammed shut. Walking out the door of the bar, I turned the shabby sign in the window from open to closed.